Oh dear, it says we cannot find your stream. And now it says excellent. Okay, that is much better. Hi, everybody, except nobody knows that the stream is happening yet because no one's been notified yet. So hi, not anybody just yet. So, which is fine. Hello. Basically, you may remember from my Pride and Prejudice video last week, the week before last. Anyway, so I said maybe I'll have some audiobook news, and then I said, then it cut to me saying, look, I'm not saying that the audiobook is cursed, but yeah, that was a thing that happened. So I thought, what would be a useful thing to do at this time? And then I thought, I know what would be a useful thing to do. You're a bit quiet. That's weird. Let's try turning it up a bit. I thought, you know what would be a useful thing to do? I could just come on and read you some of the book. Like, many things have been going wrong with it. Is that any better? Is what I'm saying here. Anyway, lost my train of thought again. Oh no, I am quite sick as well, which doesn't help. But I thought, why don't I just come on and read you the first chapter? You will unfortunately have to put up with lots of, mouse clicking and possibly coughing or sneezing or all of that kind of stuff. But, here we are. I am not sure how behind you are. How behind me you are. So, okay, when you hear this part, can you put a little smiley face emoji in the comments or something like that? Because then I will know what the delay is. I mean, when I'm reading, I will not be reading the comments anyway, but it gives me some idea of what the delay on this is. Okay, it's not too bad. It's like 15 or 20 seconds, but that's not too bad. All right. So next question is, am I still sounding very quiet to you? I've turned my own, I can hear myself in my ears very loudly because I was trying to hear if I could hear the rain, which I kind of still can, but not really, which is great. So, yeah, normally 30 to 40 seconds. Yeah. But hey, what can you do? Yes, so can you hear me clearly? Can you hear me too loudly? Like, am I weirdly clipping? But, that sort of thing is what I'm going for here. I am going to get the first chapter out because I was streaming the other day for some of my patrons, and I got, you're kind of quiet, but you're clipping on your consonants, and that's weird. So, I had to turn it down. Anyway, everybody's like, you 5x5 in FAB. Fantastic. All right. Well, given the number of things that have gone horribly wrong with the audiobook reading and recording and editing so far, I fully expect something to be on fire by the end of this. But what can you do? I thought I'll just, we'll just do it anyway and see what happens. Grand. Okay, so I am not going to be able to read anything you say from this point onwards, so I will come back to you at the end, or possibly in the middle if I have to take a break for some reason. So, Just Stab Me Now by Jill Bearup, read by the author. Dedication. For my mother, who always wanted me to be a novelist, for my viewers, who made me write this book, and for my husband and daughter, who put up with me while I did. You will also have to put up with a lot of me checking levels because sometimes I have to shout or talk loudly, and it doesn't like that. I can't believe it. No. How was that? Tell me how that was. Okay, that was fine. Great. Chapter 1. I can't believe it. I can't believe it. Lady Rosamond Hawkhurst had lived through worse days than this, but not many. A trip to Abrinia with one guard would be risky even in peacetime. A pair of long hose flew through the air to land precisely on top of a set of saddlebags at the foot of her four-poster bed. Why is Queen Eudocia willing to send me thus while we're still at war? She pulled an undershirt from a drawer, shook a stray Caladrius feather out of the sleeve, and folded the garment roughly before dropping it on a saddlebag and flopping onto the bed. Hasn't Hawkhurst given her enough already? The distant tap of the morning drum came flooding back, as sharp as the day she'd heard it 11 months ago. The black-robed messengers had been all too visible out of the window, and when she'd seen them, she'd slumped against the wall, shaking. Sir Hugo Hawkhurst was dead, killed in the war between her home country, Abrinia, and Bavaria, where she had lived for the last 16 years. Sir Hugo Hawkhurst was dead, killed in the war between her home country, Abrinia, and Bavaria, where she had lived for the last 16 years. But grief was a luxury afforded to those who didn't have an estate to look after, so Rosamond had straightened her dress, wiped her eyes, and marched wordlessly downstairs to face a future without her husband in it. At the funeral, she'd hugged her sobbing daughter and stared up at the ceiling to keep her own tears in check. Her son hadn't spoken for the entire day. And now I'm pausing, so I have lost all of the things. Oh no. Yes, unfortunately, this is the very unedited version. But hey, here we are. This is very reminiscent of John Green reading the first chapter of The Fault in Our Stars. I hope I will take that as a compliment. I hope it actually was a compliment. Let's see. At the funeral, she'd hugged... Oh dear. At the funeral, she'd hugged her sobbing daughter and stared up at the ceiling to keep her own tears in check. Her son hadn't spoken for the entire day. Both of her children had vanished as soon as the ceremony concluded, and Rosamond was grateful that they, at least, had been able to mourn in private. But somehow that day had passed, as even the worst ones must, and they had all been learning to cope. Until last month, when Baron Mabry, their liege lord, had come to visit. He'd complained at length about a shortage of Caladrius salve for his men, despite having claimed most of the stock delivered to the front lines a mere fortnight prior, before beginning to pontificate upon the Hawkhurst estate's lack of martial leadership. That was not very good. But somehow that day had passed, as even the worst ones must, and they had all been learning to cope. Until last month, when Baron Mabry, their liege lord, had come to visit. He'd complained at length about a shortage of Caladrius salve for his men, despite having claimed most of the stock delivered to the front lines a mere fortnight prior, before beginning to pontificate upon the Hawkhurst. He'd complained at length about a shortage of Caladrius salve for his men, despite having claimed most of the stock delivered to the front lines a mere fortnight prior, before beginning to pontificate upon the Hawkhurst estate's lack of martial leadership. As long as the war continues, I simply must have a Hawkhurst knight to lead the soldiers at the front. Perhaps Edmund will be free to assume the duty soon, despite his tender years. Rosamond had demurred as politely as possible, but we need to do Mabry again, really. As long as the war continues, I simply must have a Hawkhurst knight to lead the soldiers at the front. Perhaps Edmund will be free to assume the duty soon, despite his tender years. Rosamond had demurred as politely as possible. Edmund was barely 15, she had argued. Surely there could be no reason to let an untried youth lead troops into battle. But Mabry had kept up the pressure ever since. She needed a more effective deterrent, and that meant she needed to curry favour with the Bavarian crown. She needed Eudocia to intervene. When news of King Adelric's death and the ascension of his son Roland to the Abrenian throne arrived at Hawkhurst, Rosamond kissed her children goodbye and made haste to Valeria, the Bavarian capital, to offer her services to the Queen. The last thing she wanted was for her family to get more involved in the war, but better her than Edmund. The last thing she wanted was for her family to get more involved in the war, but better her than Edmund. And given her personal connection to King Roland, Rosamund was sure that Eudocia would be eager to make use of her. But Rosamund's audience with the Queen had not gone as anticipated, and now she was back in the palace's guest quarters, packing for a trip that might as well have been a suicide mission. She drew a deep, shuddering breath. Have I offended the crown in some way? Does Eudocia not want to make peace with Abrinia? She hauled herself into a sitting position, too agitated to stay still. And where did I put my green knife? Sudden, absolute silence fell, the normal noises of the palace abruptly cutting off. Rosamund jumped to her feet and ran to the window. Outside, sudden, absolute silence fell, the normal noises of the palace abruptly cutting off. Rosamund jumped to her feet and ran to the window. Outside, everything had frozen in place. The Queen's pet phoenix perched on a flagpole in the courtyard, golden tail feathers glittering. Guards clad in blue and gold paused mid-step. A nobleman stood with one arm suspended in the middle of an expansive gesture. A woman appeared. Not through the door, nor the window. No, she simply... There's some weird, tapping noise. Anyway, it's gone now. A woman appeared. Not through the door, nor the window. No, she simply... A woman appeared. Not through the door, nor the window. No, she simply blinked into existence at Rosamund's elbow. Her outfit was incongruously modern, a striped blue shirt, blue-framed glasses. Her outfit was incongruously modern, a striped blue shirt, blue-framed glasses, and tightly bunned red hair with a rollerball pen stuck through it. She and Rosamund were otherwise almost identical, and as the second woman appeared, the truth of the matter dropped into Rosamund's brain like a stone into a pond. I am the main character in this woman's story. And her author looked peeved.
Lady Rosamund Hawkhurst, Caroline said testily, you really need to calm down. The details regarding your trip to Abrinia aren't that important. I was going to fill them in later. Lady Rosamund Hawkhurst, Caroline said testily, you really need to calm down. The details regarding your trip to Abrinia aren't that important. I was going to fill them in later.
Rosamund sat back down on the bed.
It's not that important that I'm taking a week-long trip to my homeland in a time of war?
She knotted her hands in her lap, willing herself to patience.
Caroline, I heard rumours that Queen Eudocia was considering a peace treaty with King Roland, so I came to offer my services as an envoy. A bold and risky move, said Caroline, as if this hadn't been her idea in the first place, but it makes perfect sense, seeing as... She produced a worn, leather-bound notebook from thin air and flipped it open to a page entitled Family Tree. While you live in Bavaria now, you're King Roland's sister-in-law, and originally from Abrinia. And won't it be nice to see your little sister again, and call her Your Majesty?
Yes, it'll be lovely to see Cat again, said Rosamund, ignoring the Your Majesty part. But the Queen has decided to send me to Abrinia with a declaration of truce and one guard. Not even an attendant. Is she trying to enrage King Roland by putting me in mortal peril? Is Eudocia running mad? Is this a trap? Does she secretly hate me? Rosamund had not been a frequent visitor to either court in the years since her marriage. Neither she nor Hugo had been social butterflies, and court gossip was dull as ditch water. She'd never thought much of her absences from the mainstays of the social calendar, but perhaps it had offended the Bavarian crown in some way?
Of course not.
Caroline plopped down next to Rosamund on the bed.
But you have to understand, she couldn't send you with a maidservant and an entire contingent of guards. That's not how the trope works at all.
She slanted a sly smile at her heroine.
This is an enemies to lovers story. You and your hot enemy have to be alone together, in close quarters, dependent on each other, trading heated barbs and...
Oh, nope, that's wrong.
This is an enemies to lovers story. You and your hot enemy have to be alone together, in close quarters, dependent on each other, building trust and covertly eyeing each other and trading heated barbs and...
She flapped her hands, causing several stray scraps of paper to fall out of the notebook.
It's just how these things work.
Rosamond's mouth fell open.
It's just not reasonable that I'm being sent with a single guard. Very single, Caroline interrupted. Your hot enemy is neither married nor involved with anyone else.
Rosamond sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose between thumb and forefinger. No attendants at all? What about my maidservant Sally and my own guard from home? They accompanied me here.
There's been a terrible bout of, highly contagious fever. There's been a terrible bout of, highly contagious fever. Or maybe infectious, I'll have to check what the difference is. Most of the servants at the palace have caught it, including Sally and Jones, and those who haven't are being run off their feet.
I don't know what that is, but it's loud and weird sounding, so let's take a break for a second while it goes away. We will take a break while that weird sound, whatever it is, goes away, and I will say hi. This is your reminder for some water. That's a very good reminder. We can't hear any weird noises. I mean, that's fair enough, but, you know, I can, which is good. You paused just as my dog started snoring. Maybe that's the weird noise, you never know. Okay. It's kind of still there, honestly, but I think it's a plane or something. You have no idea how many of the files have been interrupted by me going, "Shut up, magpies!" Or similar, but there we go. Right, let's see. Well, we'll just do that line again because why not?
There's been a terrible bout of, highly contagious fever. Or maybe infectious, I'll have to check what the difference is. Most of the servants at the palace have caught it, including Sally and Jones, and those who haven't are being run off their feet.
Caroline shrugged, still cheery.
Your mission is too urgent to delay, so you and your hot enemy will just have to cope.
Ooh, clipping.
Your mission is too urgent to delay, so you and your hot enemy will just have to cope.
Rosamond gave up arguing. For now. Rosamond gave up arguing. For now. Does this hot enemy have a name?
Captain Collins, of the Queen's Guard.
A first name?
Working on it.
Caroline wrinkled her nose.
Working on it?
Rosamond nodded stiffly, took a deep breath, and stood up again. Fine. She could survive this. She could facilitate peace and end the war. She could get home to Edmund and Charlotte without being killed by the dangers of the road or Captain whatever his name was, Collins, if she was careful, if she was wise, and if she gave Caroline enough of the things she wanted. Then let us continue.
Great.
Caroline beamed.
Great. Time to crack on with the preparation scene.
She consulted a list on another page of her notebook.
Oh, one quick note. You are planning to pack either a knife or an ornately decorated dagger, yes?
Of course I'm planning to pack a knife, Rosamond replied, befuddled, as if she'd go anywhere without one. As if she'd go anywhere without one. As if she'd go anywhere without one. Caroline marked an item on her checklist with an ostentatious tick.
To threaten your hot enemy in the middle of the night?
Rosamond rolled her eyes.
The knife is for eating.
She gave Caroline a flat look.
Though I suppose I could stab someone with it if sufficiently motivated. Caroline either didn't notice the threat or ignored it, instead scribbling something on another page of her book. Indeed, Rosamond's author seemed to have a talent for ignoring things that didn't fit in with her bizarre and often cliched plans. Take this hot enemy business, for example. Caroline seemed to be under the impression that the fantasy story she had placed Rosamond in was some kind of romance. Truthfully, Rosamond should have known something was amiss from their very first meeting. It had taken place in a Spartan white-walled room where Caroline willed Rosamond into being and then started criticizing her appearance. Truthfully, Rosamond should have known something was amiss from their very first meeting. It had taken place in a Spartan white-walled room where Caroline willed Rosamond into being and then started criticizing her appearance.
"Why do you look like me? And why are you so old?"
"I'm 36, Rosamond had retorted, bewildered by this strange, bespectacled goddess who had complete power over her existence while remaining maddeningly vague. No, it's really raining. Oh well. "I'm 36, Rosamond had retorted, bewildered by this strange, bespectacled goddess who had complete power over her existence while remaining maddeningly vague on details.
"Yes, I see. Can you handle a sword?"
"Yes? What kind?"
"You know, a sword. Pointy end goes in the other man. Weighs about,"
Caroline frowned,
4.5 kilos?
Rosamond wasn't sure what system of measurement her world used, but she was very sure that wasn't a reasonable weight for a sword by any standard. But Caroline was uninterested in specifics, unless they related to the multiple attractive men she was planning to introduce. Men whose attention Rosamond was supposed to both desire and agonize over.
"Love triangles are perennially popular for a reason, Rosamond." "Love triangles are perennially popular for a reason, Rosamond."
Rosamond, whose grief for Hugo still caught her by surprise at odd moments, was not impressed by this, especially now that she was preparing to embark on a dangerous mission. The reason she had come to the palace had nothing... Oh, I forgot this sentence goes on for, ever. The reason she had come to the palace had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with the safety of her children. Children of a wonderful... The reason she had come to the palace had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with the safety of her children. Children of a wonderful marriage to an irreplaceable man. But it was no use trying to make this point to Caroline.
"I assume that you're packing travelling clothes?" Caroline inquired, making another note.
"Yes."
"And your most beautiful gown?"
Rosamond's eyes drifted to the saddlebags and the items jumbled atop them. Before she left the Hawkhurst estate 5 days ago, she had packed 2 court-appropriate changes of clothing, the green velvet underdress and surcoat she was currently wearing, and another dress, the details of which currently escaped her. Caroline, still bent over the notebook, folded over the corner of a page and scribbled something that Rosamond interpreted as wobbly dress.
"I haven't made up my mind about your other gown yet,"
Caroline said, snapping the book shut and looking up,
"but I'm making a note that you're packing it."
Rosamond pressed her fingers to her temples. She felt a headache coming on.
"Lovely. Could you please leave me in peace to finish this?"
Caroline faded out of view, and Rosamond forgot that the other woman had ever been there. But she remembered that her green knife was in the 3rd drawer. It is really bucketing now. A lot. That is, never mind. What can you do? Caroline Lindley was rather enjoying her new story. It did require an awful lot of internet research about subjects ranging from the difference between woods and forests to the probable weight of a sword, but she had to admit it was creatively refreshing. Definitely better than attending useless meetings and serving as wildly overqualified tech support for CrossGuard Solutions' chief finance officer.
Database administration, Caroline's actual job, lagged a distant third behind doodling in her notebook while her colleagues debated minutiae and, more recently, playing the part of George Radley's pet IT monkey. So, for the past few years, Caroline had turned to writing fanfiction, slotting characters from large movie franchises into coffee shop romances. This had garnered her a small but enthusiastic audience who had subsequently demanded the stories as actual books. That endeavour had required a number of name changes and the alteration of the more obvious parallels, but it wasn't a great deal more work. It had even made her a little bit of money, especially once she'd found an editor to help smooth the rough edges. Then her fifth coffee shop romance had achieved popularity. Or, to be more accurate, popularity on a certain section of social media. This had meant what felt like every single internet denizen. This had meant what felt like every single internet denizen suddenly had opinions, which hadn't been great for Caroline's self-esteem. She didn't consider herself the world's best writer by any means, but the acidity of a few of those reviews had left a mark. After a particularly well-known commenter had opined, "One wonders what C.S. Lindley would do if she didn't have ready." After a particularly well-known commenter had opined, "One wonders what C.S. Lindley would do if she didn't have ready-made characters with which to populate her tedious, derivative modern romances," Caroline decided she'd had quite enough of people besmirching her abilities. She was going to write something original. That's still not right. After a particularly well-known commenter had opined, "One wonders what C.S. Lindley would do if she didn't have ready-made characters with which to populate her tedious, derivative modern romances," Caroline decided she'd had quite enough of people besmirching her abilities. She was going to write something original. She had called her usual editor and told him so, omitting the part where she was about to create an entire work of fiction out of spite. She also expressed, at some considerable length, her frustrations with her current book series, and half threatened to end it in a spectacular fashion. Henry Walker, who had been working for her on a freelance basis since her second self-published book, wasn't impressed. "Your Moonbeans coffee shop series actually sells, Caroline. It would be a terrible business decision to kill off half the characters and close the place down in the next book just because you're a bit sick of it right now." He paused, mouth set, and the image of his face was still for long enough that Caroline checked the Wi-Fi strength in the corner of her laptop screen. The tiny cafe she wrote in at lunchtimes was not known for its connection speed. Henry's face fast-forwarded into his next remark. "Also, calling it lethal flat white might get you into legal trouble." That was not quite right. This is also the part where you have to listen to me do very bad impressions of a northern accent. Possibly multiple times. Also, calling it lethal flat white might get you into legal trouble." She scowled into the camera at him, and he gave her a sympathetic half-smile, pushing his hair out of his face. His stupid, thick, wavy blonde hair that always falls perfectly, and Caroline realized she was staring. She blinked and resumed scowling. Caroline realized she was staring. She blinked and resumed scowling. She really did not want to go there. It was embarrassing enough to have a crush on someone who technically worked for her. She didn't need him noticing. He was still talking. Caroline tried to pay attention. Good idea for you to take a break from the series and write something completely different," Henry said. Even if it is just an experiment. Caroline sighed, more relieved than was really appropriate. "Yes, but I've never written fantasy before, so if you're willing to do a bit of extra hand-holding on this manuscript, I'd appreciate it." She felt her face heating up and rushed on. "I know it's not your usual way of working, but I'm sure we can—" "Not a problem," he said. But then Caroline's laptop pinged. "George Radley has sent you a message," and she'd had to go.
Henry's support of the project notwithstanding, the germ of an idea for a fantasy romance had brought with it Lady Rosamond Hawkhurst, and from the start Caroline had sensed that she wasn't going to be a cooperative character. Rosamond was positively ancient compared to Caroline's usual parade of late teen and 20-somethings. She seemed to have very Henry-like opinions on the appropriate kind of sword to use, and she complained. Rosamond was positively ancient compared to Caroline's usual parade of late teen and 20-something. Sometimes past Jill writes very long sentences, and then present Jill has to figure out how she meant to parse them. Rosamond was positively ancient compared to Caroline's usual parade of late teen and 20-somethings. She seemed to have very Henry-like opinions on the appropriate kind of sword to use, and she came complete with 2 living children and 1 dead husband. The hot enemy, Captain Collins, would probably be a little easier to work with, and Caroline had a charming character she'd originally been working on for a different story to cast as the hot childhood best friend. But Rosamond? Rosamond was clearly trouble. And yet, Henry had seemed keen on the idea. That counted for something. An alarm sounded on her phone, and Caroline pulled herself back to the present, swept the lid of her laptop closed, and shoved it into her bag. An alarm sounded on her phone, and Caroline pulled herself back to the present, swept the lid of her laptop closed, and shoved it into her bag. She had to leave now if she wanted to catch the early bus to work. Maybe she could cram in a little extra writing on the journey. And maybe in her office, before the day officially started. But one thing at a time. Across the table of the palace dining hall, Robin Waverley surveyed his oldest friend, and worried. Rosamond had appeared at court for the first time in years the previous evening, without so much as a messenger bird to precede her arrival. This morning she had waited in silence among her peers for 3 hours until the Queen had called upon her for a private audience. She had spoken to Robin in passing upon her return to the Great Hall, but not since. Now they were at table in Queen Eudocia's uncharacteristically quiet banqueting hall. The fever had taken its toll on nobles and commoners alike, and though she was smiling and nodding as her immediate neighbours spoke to her, the dark smudges under her eyes and the stiffness of her posture made his stomach turn. Was she sick? Or was something else going on? Robin wasn't surprised when Rosamond left dinner early, but staying to hear the end of Countess Linavar's long-winded tale of border skirmishes meant it took him a few moments to follow suit. He caught up with Rosamond as she exited the hall, snagging her arm at the base of the sweeping staircase that led up towards the guest quarters. She didn't quite jump when he touched her, but she did relax when she saw who it was. "Rosie," Robin said, trying to keep his voice light, "may I be so bold as to say it's wonderful to see you?" "Rosie," Robin said, trying to keep his voice light, "may I be so bold as to say it's wonderful to see you?" "It's been half a year since you last saw me," said Rosamond, so that would be an appropriate comment. She'd written to him a few times, but it was true, Robin realised with chagrin. He'd only seen her twice, and that briefly, since Hugo's body had been committed to the flames. She'd written to him a few times, but it was true, Robin realised with chagrin. He'd only seen her twice, and that briefly, since Hugo's body had been committed to the flames. At the funeral she had moved through the crowds like a ghost, bowing, making small talk, attempting to smile, and her current manner retained that distant, careful quality, even now they were alone. The crease in Robin's brow deepened. He had not anticipated the degree to which grief still shadowed her. A Bavarian himself, Robin had attended boarding school with Rosamond in the neighbouring country of Coulter. Both the school and the country had... I hate this sentence. I've had to do it so many times. Here we go. Both the school and the country had retained absolute neutrality, regardless of which nearby sovereign states went to war, over what, and with whom, ensuring that Coulter itself was never the object of hostilities. Robin missed the simplicity and quiet of that country sometimes, but hope sprang eternal that he could go back one day.
Rosamond, as the eldest daughter of Abrenian paper merchants who had bought their patents of nobility, had retained absolute unconcern with the dictates of Rosamond, as the eldest daughter of Abrenian paper merchants who had bought their patents of nobility, had retained absolute unconcern with the dictates of politics or status. They'd become fast friends, keeping up a correspondence even after they went their separate ways. Robin had been delighted when Rosamond married Sir Hugo Hawkhurst as part of the previous Abrenian-Bavarian peace agreement. This had brought her to the Hawkhurst estate in northeastern Bavaria, and for much of their 20s they had seen each other fairly regularly. Robin had been particularly pleased to see how well Rosie and Hugo got on, and took special pleasure in regaling Sir Hugo with stories. Robin had been particularly pleased to see how well Rosie and Hugo got on, and took special pleasure in regaling Sir Hugo with stories of Lady Hawkhurst's school days. But then the realities of Robin's own private obligations had intervened, and he had visited less often than he should have, especially since Hugo's death last year. That was a weird noise. Especially since Hugo's death last year. And both of the times Robin had seen Rosamond since the funeral, he had been on official business, hurrying off again as quickly as he had arrived. A pang of guilt twisted in his stomach. He should have written more.
May I also mention that it's less than wonderful to see you looking so ill?
Rosamond raised an eyebrow. Such flattery, she retorted, but there was a hint of a smile on her face.
You look like you ran all the way from the Hawkhurst estate, Robin ventured, and Rosamond shrugged.
I was in a hurry.
Why?
Rosamond stopped at the top of the stairs and leaned on the banister.
Robin, I know you don't enjoy politics.
If only she knew.
But with King Adelric's
Now this is another one of those really long, complicated sentences.
But with King Adelric's death and King Roland's coronation, there's been a definite shift in military deployments on both sides. The knight who sought Hawkhurst's hospitality 2 weeks ago told us that Roland seems to be taking a less aggressive posture, and we know his farms will be suffering as much as ours in this drought. He needs labourers, not soldiers. I came to see if I could be of any assistance to Her Majesty.
She pushed herself upright again and started to walk away, but Robin matched her pace.
I'm sure you're very helpful.
I can hear my own knuckles cracking. That's never a good sign.
I'm sure you're very helpful, he offered, after a short silence.
Rosamond gave him a wry smile, though the set of her shoulders belied it.
I am a model of helpfulness, but also a dire warning as to why one shouldn't skimp on sleep when travelling. Good evening, Robin.
And before he could think of a reason to detain her further, she reached the door to her rooms and disappeared. Robin frowned. That Rosamond had come all the way to court after years of absence was a clear sign that something was amiss at Hawkhurst. Both Abrenia and Bavaria strenuously insisted that the resumption of hostilities was the other side's fault, but regardless of how the conflict had started, it had dragged on for more than 2 years, casualties were mounting, and Rosamond was right. The lack of rain was now affecting harvests on both sides of the Granella River, making a bad situation worse. As an estate near the border, Hawkhurst had been expected to provide more than its fair share of manpower and resources. Perhaps that was why she had come. Perhaps he should urge Queen Eudocia to consider a peace treaty. Perhaps he should have done a lot of things.
That was excellent, Robin. Well done.
Cracking knuckles again.
That was excellent, Robin. Well done, said Caroline,
and Robin started as the world froze around him.
Very supportive, but also just a little ambiguous. Perfect for the hot childhood best friend role. I knew I could count on you.
Robin decided to say nothing, though in a book not written by Caroline, he might have had more words to choose from. The author had some bizarre ideas about what he should be doing, including pining over his widowed best friend, apparently, and he wasn't sure what to make of it yet. He had a feeling he'd have fit better in the merchant-sailor/nobleman romance for which she'd originally created him, but the author's word was law, At least most of the time.
And that is the end of chapter 1.
Hooray! Right. One of my favorite distractions during COVID lockdown was Jennifer L. reading Pride and Prejudice. This is nice and cozy. Well, I am glad to provide similar cozy vibes. There we go. Water break. I mean, yes, but also like the end of the chapter, so I will be departing soon. It's educational. I do not know what is educational, but you know, something. Anyway, thank you for, you know, coming and participating, and I'm going to, you know, obviously save this right now. So, into, oh, it's the 30th of September. Excitement. There we go. I saved it twice, as you do. There was no other way to read the book as this. I heard you in my head while reading it. Yeah, I mean, I remember people asking, are you going to read the audiobook? And there was one particular person who was really, really adamant that I shouldn't, because I was not a voice actor, or I wasn't an actor. And like, was like, I mean, I take your point because I'm, you know, voice acting is not something that I do regularly, but you know, I've done quite a lot of acting in my time, and you know, some voiceover also. And it would just be weird hearing anybody else try and copy what my accent is, because it's just too, it defies categorization. If you've ever listened to David Tennant read some of the Doctor Who audiobooks, they're very fun, but his Rose accent is just really funny, and not like in an intentional way. It's just, you know, it's really hard, if you're not a voice acting person, to do a large number of different voices, and it's really hard to do, you know, an opposite sex voice in a very different accent. So, you know, I remember my editor saying, I love how there are parts where Leo says a great deal, but you don't ever tell us what he says, and so he only gets to communicate in quite short sentences. And I said, yeah, because I was at least a little bit conscious when I was writing it that I was going to have to say all of those in a fantasy northern accent every time he spoke. So I was like, the less you say, the better. You can think a lot of things. It's okay to think things, but you can't say a lot. You were also not a writer. Well, I mean, yes, very much to the point. I mean, I wrote things, but as it turns out, writing a novel is an entirely different kettle of fish, which I am not particularly keen to repeat, because it was a time, and not like a good one, but you know, it got done. We got it done. And we will get the audiobook done as well. This will be a thing. It will happen. Will you be streaming you reading the rest of the chapters? Maybe. It depends. You know, if that's a thing that people are interested in or not. I was like, you know what? We're gonna try this one and see how it goes. I've also learned that when it comes to accents, arguably you were the star actor in all of the shorts. Yes, people keep saying, when is this going to be adapted into a movie? I'm like, no, it's adapted from the YouTube show. You know, the book is the adaptation. You could adapt the book again, I guess, but nobody's going to. Please understand, nobody's going to do that. But you know, if they did, they would be adapting an adaptation, which would be quite funny. So you know, I'm Definitely can't try something new, such as voice acting. Look, many things um, uh, are true, and some of those things include that. Uh, it's excellent to try new things, but you also have to do them with the understanding that you might not be very good at them, which is how I originally started writing the book. It's like I had finished making the shorts, and it was like November, and they were to continue into December, and I was like, okay, we sort of rounded this off now, fantastic. And I thought, if I write something, having told everybody that I don't plan to, if I write something now and it turns out to be awful, then it doesn't matter, because I said there wasn't going to be anything. So if there still isn't anything, then no harm, no foul. If someone can draw it, they might just animate a movie of this. I mean, yes, but what I mean is, like, Netflix is not going to come in and offer me a lot of money, like, to buy the rights or anything. You might get like a bootleg copy of something, I guess, or claymation. Oh man, I hear there's a new Wallace and Gromit coming out, which, obviously those are years and years and years in the making, but I love Wallace and Gromit, so I'm really looking forward to that. Anyway, I hope, on the subject of, like, book writing, should I decide that I have a thing that I'd like to write about, and I think that writing about that thing and telling that story is more important than the other things which I would like to do, then I do it. But I have no, that there is nothing, there is no idea or plot or story or thought in my head which makes me think I would like to make that into a novel specifically. If there was, then I might do it, but there isn't, so there won't be, if you see what I mean. Yeah. I'm looking forward to the book signing. I'll be really sad if the tickets are sold out at midnight. Oh yeah, so let me drop the link for that. Let me first find the link for that, and then I'm going to go, because I thought I will do the thing where it'll take me less than an hour to read the chapter, and then I can just, chat away for the rest of the hour, as is my wont. Right, so, can I pin these? Oh, pin message. Yes, I can. All right, that is the events page for Waterstones in Canterbury, where I will be on the 23rd of October, which is in, like 3 weeks and a couple of days. So, yay. When writing the book, what was your goal? It was to write the book, to entertain people. Did you want to educate them on anything specific? No, absolutely not. I think, like, the whole goal of the book was, can you read this and enjoy it? And if if you watch the series, can you read it and enjoy it? If you didn't watch the series, it would also be great if you could read it and enjoy it, which I think some people have, and some people are like, this is just too weird, which is fine. But like, no, I don't, like, I stopped watching Doctor Who. I mean, I stopped watching Doctor Who because I went to Germany. So that was sometime between, like, the end of 11 and the beginning of 12, I think. And then I came back and I started watching Doctor Who with the lady whose name has completely gone out of my head, because apparently I'm getting old. Anyway, the blonde lady, and I watched like 3 episodes of that, and I was like, I don't enjoy being lectured. I'm here for, like, aliens and weird monsters killing people. I feel like I'm just being lectured and nobody's bothering to entertain me with anything, except for maybe creepy spiders. The creepy spiders were kind of okay, but I don't like things which feel like they're, if you're going to lecture me, you can lecture me in a lecture. If you're going to entertain me, you can entertain me in a book. If you are going to try and teach me something, at least, have the good manners to, like, hide it well. In children's books, obviously the morals tend to be more overt, but like if you're writing a book for adults, I feel like if you want to get across a message, that's totally fine, but you should, make sure to hide it nicely, in a really good story that, you can then think about the ideas that might come up afterwards. Jodie Whittaker, thank you. Because, I was like, Jodie Whittaker is a good actress, that's good, but like a good actress cannot save a show which, I'm like, I guess this is just not for me anymore, and that's okay. Maybe it is for other people. Though given its ratings, maybe it's not, but like clearly it's for somebody. Um, uh, if you're going to lecture me, do it in secret. No, I don't mind if you lecture me like with an actual lecture. Like do you know like the Royal Society Christmas lectures? Am I thinking of the wrong thing? And they do something about like maths every year or something funny like something fun, uh, or statistics or and they make it really interesting. Like those are great, and entertainment is great. But I don't like the sort of halfway house where it's supposed to be entertaining, but it's not because they're too busy trying to, tell you very important things, um, about whatever. Like I don't mind you telling me important things that you think about whatever, but entertain me at the same time. Otherwise, I'm not gonna keep watching. It is a Christmas tradition. Jill dislikes edutainment. Something fun like maths or statistics. Yeah, well, you know what I mean. They do a lecture on maths or statistics, but also they make it fun and like engaging for general audiences. Um, like they don't just give you a PowerPoint on you know knot theory or something. If you want to send a message, try Western Union. Except don't try Western Union. Except don't try Western Union, because every time anyone has ever said Western Union to me, it has been the start of some kind of scam. I don't know if that is unique to the UK. Like, I'm sure that Western Union also sends money for like legal purposes, but every time someone's been like, "Oh yes, you need to do this thing by Western Union," I'm like, "Why can't I do it by PayPal?" "No, you have to do it by Western Union." I'm like, bye. I do maths for fun. Um, Anyway, it is 2 o'clock. So, well, it's 2 o'clock here. I don't know what time it is with you. So I hope you enjoyed this somewhat haphazard reading of chapter 1, and I will see you all very soon. The Great Statistics podcast is more or less, I think, is the one you're thinking of. It's on Radio 4. Thank you for the detailed answer. You're very welcome. Look, all of my live streams, except the ones which have a very specific, like this was a very specific one because I was going to read you the thing, but then it just kind of descends into randomness, because I'm very bad at improvising. Like if you ask me, like I do, there are things where people ask me questions and I can't, I'm like, I don't know. It's a bit like when people say tell you a joke and then everything funny that you've ever thought goes out of your head. But if there are lots of people saying things, and there's usually something that I can go, that is the thought. So let us expand on the thought. Anyway, I stayed awake for this. Go to bed. Go to bed. It's good for you. Sleep is good for you. Have a very good night.